South Korea, Iran, Italy. The coronavirus outbreak that began in China has entered a new phase, spreading rapidly across the globe and hitting major stock markets. What's the impact on investors? It's time for Cool Heads. Joining me in our London studio are Amit Loder, Global Equity Portfolio Manager, and Judith Feingold, Healthcare Analyst and Co-Portfolio Manager, and, as it happens, a former medical doctor. Welcome to both of you. Judith, we were in the studio only a few weeks ago, and at the time you were saying then that coronavirus might be like SARS and that epidemic which melted away as the warmer months arrived in the northern hemisphere. But things don't seem to be quite as clear-cut as that anymore, do they?
Yeah. Interestingly, it's now been a few weeks since we characterised the genome and we still don't know much more about the virus. In terms of why that thesis might fall apart, we have seen a good number of outbreaks now in Singapore. Obviously, the weather is very hot in Singapore, so this may count against that. Hot weather will be the thing that stops this virus in its tracks.
Absolutely. And Amit, when we were speaking in the studio a few weeks ago, the received wisdom then was that this epidemic would have peaked now, if not a little bit before, and that the economic impact would be contained in the first quarter of the year. What if Judith's right and this is a virus that doesn't go away when things warm up?
Yes, I think that's definitely an issue. It seems to have been contained to an extent in China, if you look at the rate of growth of new patients there. But the issue is that it is spreading outside China, and that is actually the risk, where what you've seen in terms of loss of economic activity in China actually starts spreading across the world. It's becoming
a global problem.
Exactly.
We've actually got some data here that shows how this might be a bigger issue than we thought before. Take us through this. It's from the World Health Organization.
So this is a fascinating one which came out this Friday. Really from the Imperial College. What they've tried to do is model out what the risk of underreporting outside China of new cases is by looking at air passengers traveling to and fro from Wuhan. So basically, Wuhan in China, exactly. And so the dots are various countries, and we're basically trying to map what the underreporting versus the overreporting is. And really what you can see is that there's been a lot of underreporting of cases.
And I would argue that this is exactly what we should be seeing with a fairly unvirulent virus. So the majority of cases are not highly symptomatic. People won't be going to their doctors and they won't be being diagnosed. So this is what I expect to see in this type of a coronavirus. If you had a SARS or a MERS type, which were much more virulent, it would be different.
Okay, so underreporting at the moment, but we should expect, unfortunately, to see much more in the countries where there is an outbreak at the moment. Now, how worrying is that then, Judith, when you see the spread? You say it's not as virulent as other viruses have been, but the economic impact of the quarantine and of factories shutting down, as we've seen in China, that could spread elsewhere.
Yes, absolutely, and I expect it to. I expect to see more geographical outbreaks as the days and weeks progress, given what we've been seeing at the moment in Iran and South Korea, for example, and even northern Italy. And then although it is reassuring that this is a less virulent and lower case fatality rate than SARS, for example, in certain geographies that have less evolved healthcare systems, it still may translate to a considerable mortality burden. So we're waiting to see that.
Amit, we've seen in China that the authorities there have stepped in with intervention, the central bank, the government, easing things for companies. Is that possible in Europe if it were to take hold here?
I think we already have a fairly easy money policy, but I'd expect the governments to do more. No one wants a recession. So we'll definitely get some more money printing, probably more fiscal stimulus towards the second half of this year. And that's where you might get an effect of the markets coming back very strongly, a slingshot effect, if you like, in the second half. Very weak first half, but very strong second half, as all the money printing starts taking impact.
So we've moved from thinking this was a first quarter issue to, it sounds like, a first half issue.
I think that's absolutely right, because supply chains have now been disrupted for more than a month. Across the world, you've got inventory buildups in various parts of the supply chain. Some goods are not available out of China right now because migrant workers haven't come back. So there is a significant amount of disruption. It's becoming tougher and tougher for companies to dimension the issue, which is why it's becoming tougher for analysts to dimension the issue.
I was going to say to Judith, actually, that it's difficult to get a grasp of just how significant the impact is at the moment.
And even the US healthcare companies that I'm following, they're not sure at the moment. I think some of them are trying to guide plus or more or less conservatively. But even they would acknowledge at the moment it's such a fluid situation in China and now the rest of the world that it's very difficult for analysts to be adjusting their models.
And you're talking about the US there. Amit, the virus is spreading through the world. What about the impact on markets? Because there are other things going on as well at the same time, aren't there?
Yeah, I think that's spot on. If you look at the markets today, for example, the virus is one of the issues, but I think what's happened over the weekend with the Sanders victory and the likelihood that he will get the Democratic nomination going up, I think that's another issue that markets are dealing with. To my mind, both the virus and the US elections in some ways are joined at the hip. Remember, Trump's election plank is really a good economy. Now, if the virus continues, it leads to more slowdown in economic activity, and we see a recession or some semblance of a slowdown towards the second half of the year. I think the virus could start impacting his election chances and the likelihood that Sanders or someone like him would be the next president. In terms of what's happened with the markets today, they are really struggling to think about the uncertainty of coronavirus and add to that the uncertainty that maybe it's not Donald Trump who's the next US president, but it could be Bernie Sanders because there's a recession.
Absolutely. American politics catching the coronavirus. Amit, Judith, thank you both very much indeed. Until next time, thank you very much indeed for watching, and goodbye.